So, how does your job relate to the source and transport of the produce that ends up on grocery store shelves? And could you maybe explain that process?
Okay, so what I do is try and help the companies that do the sourcing from farm to processing through to retail make their supply chains more safe and understand how those supply chains can be made to be more resilient, which means they can withstand any weird events that may occur. And so if you're doing produce, I'll just use tomatoes as one example. So tomatoes are harvested in the U.S. for part of the year, Mexico for part of the year, and then Central America for another part of the year. They are harvested in the field and put into primary crates. The primary crates are shipped to a packing house. The packing house is where they sort the tomatoes to try and get the same size and the same quality. So they have multiple qualities and multiple grades. Once they've been sorted, they will be repackaged and then sent to grocery stores and restaurants and food service providers as things that they can either sell if it's a grocery store, or if it's a restaurant or McDonald's, they can use to make their finished product.
Okay, so with that, we were just wondering, what are some of the ways in that process that grocery stores and food companies attempt to keep the cost of transportation and such down?
Okay, the cost of transportation is part of the overall cost of goods for the item at each stage in the chain. Food companies have very low profit margins, so the actual the profits they gain versus the cost to them for the incoming materials, shipping, and the like is relatively small. So they work very hard to optimize that. The way they do that is through fairly complicated logistics planning. So Walmart, for example, has some proprietary systems that help them do their food transportation planning to minimize the cost of delivery to their actual final store.
Okay. So it sounds like you were talking about tomatoes being harvested in 3 different places throughout the year. If they manage to harvest all of this stuff from a local source, would you say that would be more or less expensive than where they harvest it now, disregarding the logistics of actually harvesting it in those local areas?
So you mean disregarding the fact that, like, where you live in Philadelphia or we live here in Minnesota, we can only grow tomatoes for 4 to 6 months of the year?
Yeah. Like just during that amount of time, if you were to obtain the produce from the local sources where you lived, how would that affect the cost?
Okay, so that depends on how you decide you're going to obtain the produce item. So if it may seem a little counterintuitive, but the cost of transportation and therefore carbon footprint is minimized for large-scale distribution chains versus local distribution chains, because you have a more efficient on-the-road and rail transport for sourcing things from California than you do sourcing from a large group of local farms.
That makes sense. So, one thing that we've noticed that affects what grocery stores sell and what ingredients they can make their food out of is that the government subsidizes corn a lot, as opposed to more nutritious fruits and vegetables, because corn so often is used in high fructose corn syrup. So we were wondering how this affects the grocery stores and why this might be.
Okay, so farm subsidies have been designed over the last 50 to 80 years to protect farmers from international competition that was deemed to be potentially unfair.
Okay.
What that does, it distorts the cost of the ingredient. So I'm sure you've heard of high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
High fructose corn syrup and high fructose beet syrup
Yes.
are available at a very affordable rate because of the sugar tariff, which is not a direct subsidy, but it works in the same way. By saying that countries like Mediterranean countries or Caribbean countries have to pay a large tariff, which is a tax,
Mm-hmm.
when that sugar comes into the U.S., means that the U.S. providers of that sugar can charge more than their cost of goods. That's why you have so much sugar in everything.
Okay. So, one final thing, because we are also dealing with providing not only local produce, but getting nutrition to low-income, impoverished neighborhoods, because we've noticed that they so often have to go to a cheaper option, which can be fast food. Just knowing how the process works, what are some of the logistical difficulties of maintaining a supermarket in a low-income neighborhood, and how could it be made easier?
Okay, so you can go online and Google this, but there's something that's referred to as a food desert. Food deserts are areas in places in urban areas, typically more impoverished areas, where access to healthier food, raw fruits, vegetables, and the like, are difficult because the cost and the logistics of supplying retailers in those areas makes it unprofitable for the grocery stores or retail industry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't deal with the primary access in these impoverished neighborhoods as far as grocery stores that they can get to without their own transportation, which is typically the problem, their nutrition suffers. and that leads to health problems including obesity and diabetes.
Okay. If you have nothing else to add, that's all we wanted to ask you. Thank you very much.